Thanks, Lily. And thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks for being here today. My name is Jessica Clemons, and it's wonderful to be back at SUNYLA. Too bad we're not in person, of course. And while I now work for Ex Libris, prior to joining Ex Libris in 2019, I was a librarian for SUNY for many years, beginning at SUNY ESF, my alma mater, and then moving on to be an AUL for research and education at the University of Buffalo. So still living in New York, even though not working for SUNY anymore. And my time with SUNY entailed liaison librarianship, building partnerships, leadership, and my favorite topic of scholarly communications. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Sara Branch, who is a fellow ex-academic. Sara was a professor of psychology at Hobart William Smith College in the Rochester area. And she joined Ex Libris about 2.5 years ago, maybe 2 months before I joined. So we both left academia and came to Ex Libris around the same time. Sara is the product expert for Splurro, and she brings her strong technical knowledge to this forum and also her unique faculty perspective to scholarly communications. And she's joining us today from her home in Minnesota. Today we have an hour, and our presentation will provide some context about the problems that Splurro solves and the opportunities that libraries have to engage with stakeholders on campus. And most importantly, we want to show you some of the powerful workflows that you can use with Splurro to accelerate scholarly communication and repository initiatives at your campus. Okay. While we're doing this, feel free to chat. Sarah's going to monitor chat while I'm speaking. Feel free to interrupt if you have anything to add. Otherwise, we'll monitor chat for each other. So one of the things, if I can get my mouse on the right screen, I think one of our most powerful use cases of Splurro and the way it supports scholarly communication is related to some of the interesting work and ideas that's happening at Brandeis University. That's an institution, it's an R1 institution in the Boston area. At Brandeis, they're using Splurro to programmatically support the research enterprise. So they really took a look at all of their systems and said, there are significant gaps. We have, kind of some ad hoc services that aren't really working together, and we need something that will allow us to achieve our goals. Their institutional repository was just a regular repository, and it wasn't complete. It was difficult to populate and maintain, and there were no strong metrics to use in order to demonstrate the ROI to the library itself as well as their other stakeholders. And if you have been attending any ACRL presentations in the last year, you may have heard Mark say this himself. So because he's not here today, I'm just going to quote him. And I think it's really compelling. Some of the struggles that they had at Brandeis are very common. So they wanted to see scholarly communications become more expansive. One of the things I love to hear Mark say is that open access is important and it's good, but that's not the end goal. It's really about the system. And so they're opening up new avenues of service to the university that are critical in turning the narrative around about the ways that libraries support academic institutions. And Splurro was really what was needed in order to help them accelerate some of those initiatives. So by integrating Splurro throughout the campus, the library's ability to impact research and scholarship has essentially been transformed through the automation process, our integrations, and the discoverability of research assets. And that's one of the things that we're going to be showing you today. And I think despite the success story at Brandeis and some of our other partners, it's really difficult to get the attention of the senior research officer or the research office, which I believe is a key partner. I'd be interested to hear if any of you agree or disagree about partnering with the research office in particular. And the senior research officer, or typically named the vice president or vice provost of research, is, in my opinion, that key library supporter. Ex Libris sponsored this Ithaca SR Report in late 2020. And essentially what Roger and Oya did was they interviewed over 40 senior research officers at AAU and APLU, those large R1 institutions, to really get an understanding of what their role is, how they view themselves, and what their challenges are currently. This is freely accessible. It's a great read if you want to learn a little bit more. But one of the things that stood out to me, again, as a librarian, I was obviously looking to see what the senior research officer thought of the library. And one of the quotes that really struck me was that despite the fact that we were typically, that's Oya and Roger, of course, they were typically introduced to the SRO by the library director, they heard little about the engagement with the library. And when they did, it was mostly related to research data management services. So if the repository is not comprehensive, complete, or connected, how does a library justify its efforts, and how does it make those connections with the research office, with the communications office, with the provost office, and with those really important necessary stakeholders? That's something, those questions are what used to keep me up at night as an IR manager. And it's a really complex system, because if any of you are familiar with scholarly communication, you know that there are many different systems. Systems tend not to speak to each other, and there are many different offices and departments and stakeholders on campus that are using their own systems, and they tend to be very siloed and disconnected. And I think that's where our customers, again, provide a really good example of why Splurro is so important. So we have partners, large and small, who are choosing to use Splurro for myriad reasons, but at the end of the day, it's about that partnership aspect on campus. Supporting the faculty, reducing the administrative burden of maintaining the IR, both from a library perspective as well as from a faculty perspective. I don't know how many articles there are on the challenges of getting faculty to engage with the repository. I know there's a lot of those. So reducing that burden, making sure that the repository is comprehensive and updated, is really, really critical, in my opinion, to the future of repositories, RIM systems, and services that libraries are able to provide to campus. And Sara will show you in detail how that happens. But when it comes to infrastructure, SUNY is already using that higher ed cloud platform. It's what you're using for Alma and Primo, for example. And that means that Splurro will be very easy to integrate with your academic ecosystem, because it extends some of the capabilities of Alma and Primo. And I recognize that there might be some non-SUNY attendees here. So any institution that has Alma Primo, it leverages that infrastructure. Splurro is also offered as a standalone solution, even if you don't have Alma. But if you do have Alma, it's leveraging that institutional infrastructure and investment. I think it makes a natural extension of why the library is a key stakeholder in this process. So it's typically not just driven by the research office. There's nice partnerships there, and infrastructure is one strong case to make sure that the library is seen as a key partner. And it also means that it's an easier implementation process, because a lot of that information is already set up. All of the Ex Libris platform services would be applied to Splurro. So those collaboration models, the user experience and mobile accessibility and responsive design is there, as well as our open APIs. And of course, what's really important, that's security and privacy right now. And Ex Libris is very well known for its multi-tenant SaaS-based solutions, but this isn't just about a SaaS solution that enables institutions to efficiently and effectively pursue its goals. It's really about the community here. Hopefully some of you are already familiar with Aluna and Igloo. There's regional conferences as well. But the community consists of amazing partners and customers who trust us to deliver our monthly updates and enhancements in order to serve higher ed. So Splurro has been on, regular monthly releases, just like many of our other products for years now. And Sara has some exciting previews of what's going to be coming in the next few months. But the pace of development with Splurro is really astounding, especially when you consider, some of the other tools on the market that are more cumbersome and time consuming to maintain, let alone populate. So I think what's been really nice for me to learn about Ex Libris during my 2.5 years here is that the customers are really what makes Ex Libris who we are, with our developer network, the idea exchange, working groups, and more things that you can see on the slides here. And it's been really a delight to see the Splurro community and the Splurro user group grow over the years. We have a very active listserv, and it's really a nice connection, not only from community member to community member, but also with our product team, making sure that we really understand what is most critical and what is most necessary to our institutions. So I think with that, that's enough of me talking about some of the foundation of Splurro. And now what I want to do is stop sharing my slides and turn it over to Sara, who's going to walk you through some of these tools. Sorry, Sara, it's taking me just a second to get on the right screen. Did you take it over for me? You're muted.
I can do it. Yeah, I got it.
There we go. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Jess did such a great introduction of me. So again, my name is Sara, and I'm the Research Solutions Specialist with Ex Libris. I get to take the next 30 minutes or so and really talk about what Splurro can actually do. And I want to go back to the title of this presentation, which is really elevating the IR beyond just an IR to a research information hub. So a large part of what I want to accomplish in my part of the presentation is really sharing with you what we mean by a research information hub and why that is so important. And how it really serves the library and benefits the institution more broadly. So I do have just a couple of slides that I'm going to go through, and I'm going to be kind of screen switching back and forth between slides and the live demonstration. So hopefully that all goes smoothly and you bear with me on that one. In terms of the just introduction though, what is Splurro? If you pay attention to this line right here where it says Research Information Hub and in parentheses it says repository, one thing I want to make really clear is that while we will talk about the Research Information Hub, that is serving as the institutional repository. So I don't want there to be any confusion. Splurro does function as an institutional repository. Why we are talking about elevating the repository to this idea of a research information hub is because one of the critical features of Splurro is that we're really adding more data and more content to it than you may see in just the traditional institutional repository. Of course, we have the research assets, but in addition to that, we have information about the researchers. You can have information about grants and do some grant tracking and affiliating grants with those scholarly assets. We have expert profiles. We have information about research projects and researcher activities and even media mentions. So the idea is to really make that repository a dynamic source of comprehensive information about scholarship at the institution, including and going beyond that list of assets and scholarly productivity. And as just mentioned, and we all know, it's difficult to even get that information into existing institutional repositories. We love to say that when I joined Ex Libris as a faculty member, I didn't know what the institutional repository was. So for everybody out there who works with faculty, I understand your pain now that I'm on this side of it, and I see how valuable that repository is. So with Splurro, we have additionally really tried to automate much of that process of identifying and capturing that scholarly content from publications to other publicly available scholarly assets through our smart harvesting AI, which I'm going to talk about in more detail in a few minutes, but also by making that the process of depositing much more easy for both faculty as well as for staff and administrators. So whether that's a direct researcher deposit or a mediated deposit, also adding automation to the work of capturing that metadata. I'll show examples of all of this and go into it in more detail. But the idea is that by elevating that repository to this really comprehensive and dynamic research information hub, what it becomes is a tool that's valuable to the library and also beyond. So it provides a search SEO friendly research discovery portal. It provides expert profiles for an expert finder system. If you're also using Pivot RP for your funding discovery, it can also provide funding opportunity information to your users. And all of this then feeds, right, excellent and valuable analytics. This is a challenge we hear from our users constantly, that even answering a simple question like how many publications did the institution produce last year is really difficult. And it really wasn't until I joined Ex Libris that I realized, as a faculty member who was producing research, there was no central accounting of that at the institution. There was nobody at my institution who really knew the breadth of what I was doing. And that's what a Splurro offers. It offers it to faculty members, but then also to the institution for things like celebrations of scholarship, accreditation reporting, information to support ranking information and other kinds of assessments. And then, of course, by making all of this publicly available, the option to build additional relationships like industry partnerships, and then of course supporting all of those important open access initiatives. I just want to mention that we also have a number of integrations with various other products. You'll see some of this in the live demo that I'm going to do today. For example, Altmetric. So you'll see when we're looking at the list of research assets that there is an auto-populated Altmetric badge so that researchers and users can see when the scholarship is getting picked up and talked about in the news and on social media. We talk more and more about the importance of faculty members in particular being able to show the alternative kind of impact of their work. With Crossref and DataCite, if institutions subscribe, they can actually mint DOIs directly through a Splurro. Our team has worked very closely with the Google Scholar team to ensure that we have all of the information for SEO optimization through Google Scholar, and that we have the information to pass along to our customers so that they know what to do on their end to maximize that. Integration with ORCID on those Splurro researcher or expert profiles. So at the end of this year, that will be integration where the Splurro profiles actually harvest the data directly from ORCID profiles. And by next year, that will be two-way integration so that the ORCID profile can also be updated with information from that Splurro profile, which is a huge value add for faculty members because when they leave an institution, they keep that ORCID profile. So they still benefit from some of that automated harvesting that we see in a Splurro. There are a couple of other integrations here. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I do just want to emphasize that as we're trying to build out this really dynamic research information hub, we are looking to partner with other systems that allow us to build some of that information, again, more automatically, so it's less manual effort on behalf of administrators. A good example of this is Retriever. Retriever is technically only relevant in the Nordic countries right now, but it is an application that helps to capture media mentions for researchers at institutions. Media is a huge impact when your researchers and their scholarship are getting picked up and talked about. Of course, you want to know that and capture that. So we're interested in identifying solutions like that for the US as well. And then also something like Knowledge Unlatched or OABL, which actually supports the article processing charge workflows in Splurro as well. So we're really trying again to build it out, not just to be this great research information hub, but actually a really comprehensive tool for research management, including things like DOI minting and managing article processing charges. All right, so the next step is to really talk about, what can you put into the repository? So we're claiming that you can go above and beyond what you're doing in your existing repository. What does that look like? The question then is, how do we populate the repository and or the information hub, and what can you populate it with? I'm going to come back to the smart harvesting in a moment, actually, because I want to start with maybe some more of the basics that people are really familiar with. And I want to give you a peek into what this final product in a Splurro can look like. So I'm actually going to show you a profile for a SUNY ESF researcher as they've just joined our community here. But I want to start just by giving you a glimpse here. You can see what I'm talking about. So this is a profile for myself. not all of the assets here are real assets. For me, it's for demonstration purposes. But I think it's really important to emphasize that with a Splurro, we think it's critical that we can represent all different types of research and scholarship from all different disciplines. So not just STEM and not just those standard PDFs. Of course, though, it is important to have those as well. And we see that under different types of publications, but also being able to see things like conferences and events and those creative works. So in this case, I've got a film, I've got a photograph and some other things like that. But then also things like patents, posted content, so an accepted manuscript that I've submitted, I've got a blog post that's up there, and even things like data sets. At this time, we have over 100 different deposit forms for various asset types, and then a general deposit form on the off chance there is an additional form of scholarship and research that we haven't captured yet already. So it's very important that we can really build out everything that is in, that we can build a repository with everything that is relevant to be in it, and that we're supporting all types of scholarships. I also want to mention that this includes supporting curricular material. So that could be things like lecture slides, a textbook, even worksheets that somebody has put together. That counts as a form of scholarship. And actually just recently in our monthly updates, we added some integration between a Splurro and Leganto. So anybody out there who's using Leganto, which is our course resource management system, portal visitors can now use that cited button in Leganto just to add citations directly from the Splurro asset page. So if you're looking at somebody's information, some of their scholarship, you think this is great, I want to use it in a class, then it's very easy to just go ahead and add it directly through Leganto. Now, of course, the question here is how do we get to this point with all of this content visible and available in the repository and in the Research Information Hub? And for that, we're going to go back to the smart harvesting discussion here for a moment. So, of course, there is the manual deposit process. As I mentioned, we've added some automation there, so I'll go back and show you that. But really what we're relying on here and what we're finding so very valuable for our existing customers is the smart harvesting. So the smart harvesting is leveraging our central discovery index. I think most of you are probably somewhat familiar with this if you're using Alma and Primo, but for those of you who aren't, the central discovery index actually feeds our Ex Libris discovery system, so Summon and Primo. Because it's feeding these discovery systems globally for a wealth of libraries, of course, it has huge content coverage. So it has over 4.5 billion metadata records in it at this point. It represents different kinds of content from journal articles to books, patents, data sets, and conference proceedings. And it has fairly good representation across disciplines because, again, it's not just a citation aggregator. It's not targeted towards specific disciplines. So really complete representation. And a lot of the content that's in the CDI is coming directly from publishers or potentially pulling it from other things like preprint repositories like archive, for example. So essentially, Ex Libris has this wealth of content and metadata information at our fingertips, so we can leverage this to actually build out and automate that identification and importing of content information. So to build up that repository or research information hub with content here, there's really a three-step process. The first is that we would just migrate all the content you have in an existing repository. Of course, you've already put in that work. You know that that's correct content that belongs to your researchers. And so we can go ahead and migrate that all over. We can also look at updating the metadata with information from the CDI. The second step of that is what we call smart expansion. And this is where we can leverage any existing information that you have about content you know belongs to your researchers. So we can take identifiers like DOI or PubMed IDs from existing citation lists or faculty reporting systems or even ORCID profiles. All that content that you already know is out there, you already know exists, and you just need the metadata for it. We can do that and we can import directly from the CDI. And then the third step is the smart harvesting. And this is really the opportunity to fill in the gaps. And there are some really big gaps sometimes. We tend to find that most repositories have about 20 or 30% of the content that their researchers have produced. And so we want to up that to 80 or 90%. I always like to say we're not arguing smart harvesting is going to capture 100% of everything, but consistently it captures 80, 90+% of assets for researchers. The way smart harvesting works is we're leveraging that central discovery index. We've created a machine learning algorithm that essentially takes the information that it has about the researchers based on their Splurro profiles, internal Splurro profiles, including things like their name variants, their affiliations, of course, identifiers like an ORCID ID and keywords for their research topics. It sends a query out to that central discovery index, identifies and return candidate assets that look like they belong to a researcher affiliated with your institution. At that point, there is a job to go through an author matching approval process and then a deduplication process, and then those assets can be added to the repository. And they can be automatically approved or manually approved. There are workflow options depending on what works best for you. To give you an example, there's really not much to see in terms of the job itself because it's a button that you click and the system does its thing. But what is important to see is the results that come into that. So the screen that I've just put up is the Splurro admin interface. So if you were using a Splurro, this is what you would see. For those of you who are Alma users, you'll see that it's very similar in UI design to Alma, the exception being that you're only seeing the research workflows here. A couple reasons for that. One, it's a simplified user system, and because there is so much data for Splurro specifically, it narrows it down and lets the system work just with that. But also, in terms of elevating this to a research information hub, there are many institutions where there are other stakeholders who are interested in having access to some of the functionality in this system, especially the analytics. That can include sponsored programs or the research office. And in that case, you can give people like that admin access to functionality in a Splurro without exposing that broader library management system. So if I look at my repository tab here, I'm going to go down to the smart harvesting and to this author matching approval task list. And so I did actually run the smart harvesting for a researcher at SUNY ESF. And I just want to emphasize that this was a few months ago when we were first talking with them and we were giving them an example of what it could look like. So just know that when I put this up, what you're seeing is an example profile, not a live profile through SUNY ESF. They're still undergoing implementation. But if I search for the researcher by name, it's Timothy Volk, who's one of the faculty members at SUNY ESF. Essentially what you'll see is that it's going to pull up a list of all of these assets that it captured automatically through the smart harvesting process. And you can see here at the top that it captured 116 assets. So you can imagine if you tried to just identify those 100 plus assets, publications that Dr. Volk has, or if you needed to manually input those 100 plus publications that Dr. Volk has, it's a huge time commitment that frankly nobody has time for. We all know that. And so you can see that when these are coming in, they get a status assigned to them that ranges from, a status here that gets assigned to them that ranges from uncertain to strong to very strong. That's an assessment or a score that the system is assigning based on the degree of matching from the metadata for the researcher to what's in the publication here. And then again, for status, you can choose to have things approved automatically or manually approved. So just to say, you're seeing a lot of content that's coming in, and you're seeing fairly complete metadata for these assets as well, including things like the abstract. Now, a question we always get is what actually comes in with the smart harvesting. It brings in the metadata from the record in the CDI. If there is a link available to it being publicly accessible somewhere, it can bring in that link as well. It does not bring in any full text files. At this point, we are not doing that because of things like access right issues. So we ensure that everything that does come in can be openly available so that, again, you don't have to be worried about checking access rights on those smart harvesting assets. But to show you what this looks like in the final format, what I actually want to do is switch over to Timothy's profile here. And so you can see this is an example of what the researcher profiles look like. Lots of good information here just on the home page. But if I switch to the output tab here, you're going to see that I actually added some assets as well manually, which is very easy to do. And so altogether for this singular researcher, we have 134 different assets for him. That includes journal articles, book chapters, conference proceedings, reports that he's written, and I added some patents as well. He has a number of patents. Of course, I did not manually do all of this. There's no way I would have time to do that. And that's really the beauty of that smart harvesting process, is the smart harvesting added pretty much all of the content that you're seeing here, and I just added a few myself, which is a very easy and straightforward process where a lot of the work is actually automated for me. But this is what we're really looking at with the smart harvesting. And these are the gaps that we're really trying to fill. And speaking of the gaps that we're filling, returning to the slides here for a moment, University of Iowa was one of our key development partners. They were the first institution to begin using the smart harvesting. And they were kind enough to give us some good examples of how smart harvesting has helped them to fill in these gaps. So one example that they started running last summer during COVID, they were focusing on faculty with COVID relevant work. And you can see here that they ran it for Stanley Perlman, who in their existing repository had 38 assets listed. And after we went through and ran that, or they went through and ran that smart harvesting process, that was over 200 assets. So that's a really big gap. And you can imagine that that's not the size of gap for all researchers, but for a lot of those people who are in STEM or for whom publications are their dominant form of productivity, there's a lot of information out there that the smart harvesting can really help capture.
I just want to add one thing really quick. Obviously, I've seen this presentation and demo many times, but I haven't seen Tim's information in a while. And I just noticed that his top result is from July 2021. So, I'm always impressed by how up to date the system can be. It's like, yes. Not even July yet, and it's already in there.
Yes. So that's a lot of that is coming from preprint dates. But so the other point to make here is that while obviously at implementation or when you add a new researcher to your institution, you can run this retrospectively like I did for Tim, so that you're capturing everything from his entire career. After that, the job runs every week. So to Jess's point, the system knows the last time that I ran this for Tim, or we can put in a specific date, and then we can just check for what he's produced since then. So the idea is not only building out the repository or the research information hub with this content one time at implementation, it's being able to actually build it out and keep it up to date all of the time, so that you're no longer dependent on faculty letting you know when they've published something, or for a staff member to be collecting CVs or things like that, but actually just capturing this automatically and consistently. So that is really staying up to date. In terms of building out the repository, I've mentioned a couple times that it's also very easy to add content manually. And we know, of course, that that is going to be something you need to do. Not everybody's scholarship is publicly available, or they might want to add a preprint. So just to show you quickly what that looks like, I am logged into the profile as if I was Tim. This is how faculty would engage with the system. And so all Tim has to do is select add content and then the type of asset he wants to deposit. Again, I mentioned we have deposit forms for over 100 different types of assets at this point, again, representing scholarship and different kinds of research products from all different disciplines. So here we have a whole list of creative works that people could deposit, from musical scores to poetry, those interactive resources like blogs and podcasts, as I had mentioned, some of those educational resources as well here. So teaching and learning, case studies, textbooks, tutorials, and then of course, again, all of those kind of standard publications. So if Tim wants to go ahead and deposit a journal article, that's easy to do. He simply selects that, it activates this 4-step wizard. And then if he has a title, a DOI, or a PubMed ID, and if this is something that's likely to be in our central discovery index because it's published, he can actually go ahead and paste that. And what you see is that the system's going out and it's searching the CDI for the record. So it's returned it. He can go ahead and select that. And what's nice is if I skip to the end now, you can actually see that the system has auto-populated all of this metadata for him. So he does not need to manually enter this. Good for him, because it means less time, less work, and faculty are more likely to engage with the system. Also good for administration and for the quality of metadata in the system if you're not dependent on people to be manually entering all of it. And if I go back, I'll just point out here that he also has the option to add links if this is openly available somewhere, or to select files. He can add multiple files to a single asset. As if we go through this wizard, everywhere you see this icon, all of that metadata was auto-populated. So he could add or edit any of this if he needed to. This first page is specific to the publication and then to the journal itself. And then he also has the option to build relationships. So another key piece of Splurro is that in this dynamic research information hub, we don't want a bunch of siloed individual pieces of data. We actually want to see how these things all connect. So you can build relationships between all of the different types of content in Splurro. That means building a relationship between an asset and a grant or a media mention or a research project that's listed, and really being able to build this all out. And then again, we're just back to the deposit form. He can agree to terms and conditions and go ahead and submit. The deposit process for the staff side is pretty much exactly the same. If we go back to that administrative workflow that we were just looking at here on the repository and the deposit asset side, really the only difference here is that, of course, as the administrator or staff member, you have to select the researcher you're depositing on behalf of, but same process, select that asset type, provide a DOI or PubMed ID or a title, and it can auto-populate that metadata. What's nice is that the system will also let you know, as it has done here, that there is actually already a matching asset. So Tim's deposited it. I haven't reviewed and approved it yet, but the system alerts me that there is a duplicate entry here. So that's really nice. And if for some reason I want to just keep moving ahead anyway, I can do that. And you can see that it does auto-populate that metadata here, just like we saw before. And one comment I always like to make, just in terms of the idea of building out the repository, there's the list of metadata that came in, is that while what you're seeing me do is one by one, so adding an asset or something like that, all of this can be done in bulk. So of course, we don't anticipate that you'll do this one by one, but you can do all of this in bulk too. So add assets in bulk, update them in bulk, add researchers in bulk. And it's an entirely open system. So you can also use APIs to import data from other systems or even export the data out of a Splurro into other internal systems, which can be very valuable, again, in terms of leveraging what is the research information hub here. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk about, that's all about building out the repository, right? Really relying on smart harvesting for the bulk of that, but then having researchers and faculty be able to deposit on their own and have that then also supported by the deposit on behalf of the library. I will say that just a little customer example, we've had really good feedback from a couple of our Australian customers who were early adopters of those profiles. And in fact, they told us that one of their faculty members deposited, I think it was 70 different assets in the first week because they found the process so simple. And I'll show you a couple of customer examples here in a minute of really complete profiles from different disciplines and not just those more kind of traditional STEM disciplines. Because all of this, in addition to ensuring that the institution has a unified source, a unified comprehensive source of data for research, data about research coming out of the institution, is to make it visible, discoverable, and increase the impact that it's having. Because of course, that's exactly what the researchers want, and that's what the institution wants as well. So visibility, discoverability, and impact. The way we're doing that is with our public-facing research portal. So here we are leveraging that research information hub. We are making visible all of that data that you've got, from the publications to the researcher expertise to the grant information and even those projects and media mentions. So it's really equipping the institution with a state-of-the-art public-facing research portal. Now, of course, while we love the research portal, I also always like to mention that we recognize a lot of users start their searching in somewhere like Google or Google Scholar. So we are also working very hard to ensure the search engine optimization for all of this content as well. So you guys are going to look out because you're going to get a bit of a sneak peek about the upcoming release to the new user interface. So currently, if I open up one of our existing institutions user interfaces here, this is Southern Cross University. They're one of those Australian partners I mentioned, has had such great adoption with faculty profiles. And this is currently the landing page for the research portal. So those of you who are familiar with Primo, you will see that this looks a lot like Primo. It's based on the Primo user interface. But in September of this year, we are getting to launch a whole new UI for the research portal. This user interface change has come with a lot of feedback from our existing customers, feedback about what would work best for them and their users, including things like having fewer clicks to actually see some type of an asset. So here you can see for Southern Cross, I'm able to view their researcher profiles. I can search all of their work that's available through open access, or I can even look by their specific organizational units. with that new user interface or new research portal, this is what it's going to look like. So it's very sleek, it's very modern. You can see, and not all of this will be live immediately in September, but it's on the roadmap that just like in the existing one, I can search by researchers, open access, ETDs, but I'll also be able to search by those projects. Projects can be added to the system, researchers can be associated with them, other institutions can be associated with them. So you can really see not just the end product of the research that your faculty are doing, but you can actually start to see the projects themselves. This is important for identifying things like interdisciplinary collaboration on campus and understanding where kind of key points of work are, things that you may want to elevate to official research centers, for example. But then also grants, those media mentions, the activities. The activities module is coming in October of 2021. This is where you can track things like courses taught, mentorship activity, service activity, and things of that nature. The other nice piece of the user interface is that right now, when we look at this, you can see if I scroll down that it is possible to have some portal metrics displaying, which we're seeing here. In the new user interface, institutions will also be able to highlight specific researcher stories or even things like their top 10, right? So top 10 most viewed or most downloaded or what's been recently added. So again, a really sleek user interface to make this discoverable. I want to go back to an example from Tim's list here, because in terms of discovery and impact, one of the things that we want is the ability to see all of that related content, which I had mentioned before. So I'm actually going to scroll down to one of Tim's assets that I've put in here, just to give you an example of what this can look like. So this is a journal article that he's published. You know, one of the aspects of a Splurro is being able to provide things like open access support. And so if we look at the detailed description here of this asset, you can actually see, if I expand all these files and links, that I, on behalf of him, have added multiple files to this asset that includes the published version of it, which is open, which I'm able to indicate, but I could also indicate if there's an embargo period, or I could identify the correct access rights. And I can do that by the individual files or by the asset itself. But I've also got his tables, his figures, and even a link out to where this is publicly available. So providing not only the discoverability, but potentially the access to this research as well. In terms of supporting open access, and I have a slide that's coming up about this in the future, but since we're talking about it, I just want to mention it here. That was one of the deciding factors from our other customers, which is Rutgers. They have a very strict open access mandate. All of the publications their faculty put out are supposed to be in their institutional repository and open. So you can see that they were very excited to be able to use a Splurro to automatically capture that publication information, so they knew that something had been produced. They can run a report that says, show us all the journal articles that don't have a file attached, and then they've got a short list of people to reach out to get the copies of those files. And as you can see here, they're now using it to really support that open access mandate and make it easy for faculty to comply with that mandate to hopefully increase those compliance levels. In terms of the expertise discovery side of that research portal, I do want to go back here to Southern Cross for a moment to show an example of this. So I'm going to go ahead and open their researcher profiles. And I'm going to do a search to make one point here about the search functionality in a Splurro. So I'm going to type in a key term here. I could also search that term specifically by the name or affiliation. Obviously, coral reef is neither of those things, so we're just going to hit search. And what you see is that it's going to return a list of profiles for people where coral reef is listed somewhere in there. One of the people that comes up here is Peter Harrison. And what I like to point out is that if you look at his keywords down here, obviously coral reef is not one of them. Splurro expands beyond searching just the keywords that somebody has added to their profile to actually search all of the content here. So it's searching his research outputs, it's searching the grant awards that he has listed here. And why that is important is because when people start looking for experts at an institution, it's not just about what keywords have they self-identified with, because people's work changes or they branch into new areas. Really what Splurro is able to do is say, hey, this person's been publishing on this topic, even though they don't have it listed as a keyword, so they might be somebody worth looking at. What we are working to build out now is to actually provide some context to those search results, so that there's a bit of an explanation as to why this person has appeared. Have they published 30 articles or 2 articles? So people can really start to identify those experts at the institution. The last thing, though, that I want to talk about here specifically is the analytics. And I'm going to, if I can find my slides and remember where I was, go back to those here for just a moment. So I had already talked about the support of open access. And so I won't spend a lot of time here because I want to leave some time for questions. But the other piece of a Splurro is providing those data and insights. And this is where we see a lot of interest from not only the library, but also other stakeholders like the Office of Research. Back to that issue of just wanting to be able to answer some very basic questions about scholarly productivity at the institution, and then also go beyond that to even do some work such as identifying key areas of research, those interdisciplinary collaborations, and some links between grant funding and assets as well. So with the analytics, it's leveraging the Oracle Analytics Server. If you use Alma, it's the exact same analytics server that you have there. So both for creating those reports and for the data visualization, and really being able to answer questions like, who are our researchers collaborating with? What is the range of the impact that they're having? What are the main fields of study across these different organizational units? So if we go back to looking at that user interface, I'm just going to pull up our data visualization bar here. There are 5 different subject areas for a Splurro Analytics. You have information about the assets in the repository, again, celebration of scholarship, what was produced in the last year. You have information about how that's being used. So what's the impact it's having? How often is it getting downloaded? How many times is that record being viewed? Who's requesting to see it? And then information about the researchers themselves, as well as the grant information that's in the system. If I just open one of these examples from our data visualization process here, you can see that this is looking at those assets in the repository by, for example, category and type. So I have a good idea of what's the spread here for the scholarship being produced at my institution. It's predominantly journal articles, that makes sense. But we've also got films, we've got some data sets, we've got conference work that's happening here as well. And if we look across the tabs, we've got different tabs here. So again, I can look at these relationships between the assets. I've got publications linked to data sets and linked to grants and linked to conference events. And so you can really build out these very kind of complex, either simple or complex analytics that really give insight into the scholarship at the institution and the research activity. Those simple questions like how much, but also moving beyond that to really getting an overall picture of what's happening at the institution. And of course, just like with the analytics in Alma, there are just straight out of the box reports like you're seeing here, but you can also build all of your own reports as well. And there is a plethora of data fields related to all of those subject areas to do that. I think I counted, and for the research assets subject area alone, I think there's over 75 data fields. So really being able to build out some really excellent reports. I did that myself just to give a quick example of what you might be able to do with it. So I, imagined that somebody had to create a 3-year scholarship productivity report. And so what I did is for University of Splurro, our system here, I produced a list of all of the assets that had been published between 2019 and 2021 and the affiliated organizational unit. In this case, I exported all this data to Excel so I could format it and use it how I wish to. But you can, of course, also export it directly from a Splurro in this format. And then I can build out some of those excellent data visualizations. So this is looking at those different asset types. This is then across discipline. This is breaking that out by the more specific categories of those assets by the area of study, and then looking at it at a specific department level. And in this case, for the Department of Psych, I want to know the title and who the affiliated researchers are, and then again, can build out those data visualizations. So really some very valuable information. This is just a very basic report. Again, you could go much more connected and related than this. All right, and I think here I'm going to go ahead and go back to my slides. We do want to make sure we leave a few minutes for questions. I'm going to turn it back to Jess for a quick summary, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Thanks, Sarah. I think you did a great job of talking about the powerful tools that a Splurro has to make libraries more impactful on campus. But I also think that the open access functionality cannot be overemphasized, because the first step in any open access policy is first knowing what faculty have published. And with that policy mandate in SUNY, I think that this is really a tool that can help libraries have a better repository and also help achieve the dream of whatever their open access policy says. So I think that's really, really important. And if we haven't said it enough, I think the fact that a Splurro is a tool that supports all of the disciplines. So this isn't just for the UBs and the ESFs of the SUNY system. There is so much wonderful activity that's happening across campuses. Really, I think about that logo slide where we have the Food and Drug Administration that has, I think, over 3,000, or is it, I think it was maybe 4,500 researchers, and they're using a Splurro. And then I think of those smaller colleges like Hillsdale, which I think might be our smallest customer, who has less than 2,000 students. Really, these institutions, regardless of the size and volume of research, it's really important for them to represent all of their faculty, all of their disciplines, and also the variety of scholarly and research outputs that they produce. They partner with communications, they partner with other stakeholders, and the library is really the key player from a data management perspective. So I think that that's really key, that's really important. And I see there, a lot of SUNY initiatives that perhaps Ex Libris can help us or can help you with. So I do just want to save some time for questions, comments, and observations. And of course, if there's anyone attending who's not at a SUNY institution, of course, we're happy to hear from you as well. So are there any questions?
And if there are, you're welcome to unmute or to throw them in the chat.
I was just going to say that if anybody's talking, I can't hear you yet. Another thing that I think is important, well, first, my contact information is there. So if you think of anything after this presentation, feel free to let me know. If you want a link to the Ithaca report or any of Mark's presentations in the past, we're happy to send those to you. But otherwise, I also realize that we're keeping you from lunch in the keynote and there's no break here. So I really do want to encourage you to reach out to us if you do have any questions or comments. And also, I really appreciate that you took an hour to spend with us today to learn about some of the cool things that Ex Libris is doing. Lily, is there anything else that you need from us in order to wrap up?
No, I don't think so. This has been a very informative session. We could certainly hang on for a couple more minutes. If anybody does have any questions they'd like to put in the chat or ask, feel free to unmute as Jessica has already mentioned.
I will add that we do not yet have a community college partner. So if that's something that is of interest, would love to talk to you about that as well. All right. Well, I hope that you all continue to enjoy the rest of SUNY and that you have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.